The more you dig into life in the Roman Empire, the more it begins to feel a lot like Western society, particularly around two areas that are often abused, that of alcohol and of sex. And Paul knew this from his Roman context and drew from it often in order to speak into the conduct of believers. And in this episode, Brad Nelson tackles pubs and brothels to talk about these two facets of Roman society to help us to have a better understanding of what Paul was saying 2,000 years ago so that we can better understand what it means for our lives today. So let's jump into part 5, life in the Roman Empire.
So, again, I lost the rock, paper, scissors on this one. I don't know what happened. Bad go of things there. So I mentioned earlier in the section on Greco-Roman views on sexuality, Roman views on sexuality, that the phallic imagery was pervasive in the culture. And one of the ways that you would see this show up is it functioned like a sign that was there in the street to announce a brothel, in the same way that when we see this, we know, we're dealing with a barber shop. All right, so this is a picture of a brothel from Pompeii. It's called a lupanar. And what I want to do is I want to just walk you through kind of what you would encounter if you were to wander into one of these things in the ancient world. So first, you get this, that when you walk into the brothel, the prostitutes are assembled in what was called battle line. They're assembled one after the other, standing in front of a doorway with a cubicle space behind them, typically with some kind of sign above their head or above the door with their nickname and their price. Now, in 2004, I spent the summer in Southeast Asia doing some work with an amazing organization called the International Justice Mission. And I got to see their undercover work trying to bring to justice these human traffickers who were taking women, and particularly young girls, and forcing them into sexual servitude. There's a whole industry of this, and what this was called is a fishbowl brothel. It's essentially the human version of a buffet line. That's what you got to see when you think of the battle line. The prices, the nicknames were on the things above their heads. They were staffed by both men and women. This was not simply just isolated to women. You could service all of your desires and needs at a brothel. I mentioned to you, we're flying here. I mentioned to you that they were staffed mostly by slaves, and that a lot of times the mistress of the house would go out and they would search through the exposed children and to bring them in. Very often, if you were a slave, you would be forced into this kind of sexual servitude. Now, if you walked into that cubicle, you would see essentially something like this. It's just a raised platform with a bed, and then above that is the kind of erotic artwork that we looked at a little bit earlier. And again, this is sort of just a enhancement of the mood, I guess you could say, that comes with the brothel. Now, just 3 quick observations, because with the conclusion of this, we're going to leave the sexuality of the Greco-Roman world behind. And just 3 observations. 1, when you objectify people in this way, you end up with industries that prey on human dignity. And I mentioned the International Justice Mission, but what you've got to understand is that this is something that still happens today. This is a sexual industry. It's happening all over the world. My friends, we're so Roman. We are so Roman. And I would encourage you to look into IJM, visit their website, and see how you could get involved and see how you could support the work that they're doing. Second thing, obviously with the advent of the internet, we now face a world of pornography. The porn industry generates $12 billion in revenue each year. I was reading a book in preparation for some of these sessions called The Pornification of America. And in this book, they interview an adult actress and they ask her, what is the future of porn? Her answer, violence. It tends toward the degradation of human persons, not just the person being subjected to it, but also the person engaging in it. This is an epidemic that we must pay attention to. And then there's this whole other element of what we could just call the hookup culture. And if you want to read a very fascinating book from a Jesus perspective that weaves in a little brain science, I would commend to you One Life by Scott McKnight. He has a chapter in this book on the neuroscience of sex and how what happens when two people are intimate together, it forms a neurological pathway. And what happens is when you go from one partner to another partner to another partner, it literally confuses your brain. And sex becomes less and less desirable. And so you'll read in this book ways in which people who are growing up in this culture and are hooking up are just so deeply dissatisfied by sex. And I am just amazed as I've gone through all of this preparation to see that once again, sexual fidelity and sexual ethics leads to a better society, and it actually leads to a more satisfying life. I would commend you to pick up that book. Now let's talk about pubs. So the only place in the scriptures the word taberna shows up is in Acts chapter 28, verse 15. It says this: the believers from there, when they heard of us, came as far as the Forum of Ephesus and the 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And so here's a map to kind of give you an idea. Coming up towards Rome along the Forum of Ephesus, there is this way station in between called the 3 taverns, and you can go there today. This is the Forum of Ephesus, and this is kind of a picture of what that area looks like. It's beautiful. But when Pompeii has been excavated, essentially they found a series of structures called Cauponae. Now, Cauponae, it's like an inn. It's a place you could find lodging for the night, you could get food, and you could stay for the evening. But they also found a series of buildings called popinae, and this would be like a bar or a tavern or taberna. And they're actually all over Pompeii and Herculaneum. And you can see they're almost like these fast food counters where you could come up, you could get wine, you could get hot food, and they're all over the place. In fact, there were 30 Cauponae in Pompeii. Over 120 popinae have been uncovered. Now, when we talked about the poor earlier this morning in the people snapshots, I mentioned this strange discrepancy that for those who lived in insulae, the further up in the building you lived, the poorer you were. And it also meant that you lacked a kitchen. You probably weren't able to prepare your food at home. And so you had to go to a popinae to have your food. So essentially, you get a collection of people at mealtime who are always gathering at the pub, at the bar, at the taberna to share their meals. Now, the wealthy folks didn't frequent these establishments, and they were not well thought of. And you can find in the graffiti there evidence of gambling that took place. There's graffiti of 2 patrons who are about to get into a fight about who gets served their wine first. And this is the sort of thing, there's artwork, I think, I don't know for sure, but I saw this and I had a good laugh, that if you spend too much time in the popinae, you could end up drunk baby on a tiger, okay? I think the scene from The Hangover is not something somebody came up with. I think they just studied the Greco-Roman world. Now, here's what's interesting to me about this, because people would spend a lot of their time hanging out in the popinae, lingering over wine. So when you get to this text in Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul addresses being drunk, there's a little detail in there that never stood out to me until I prepared for this session. He says, be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise. And then there's this phrase, making the most of the time. Because the days are evil, so do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. So it's in the context of time. Be careful about how you're using your time. And I have to believe that as a man trained as a rabbi, that one of the texts that's in the back of Paul's mind as he writes these words is Proverbs 23, which says this: who has woe, who has sorrow, who has strife, who has complaining, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes? Those who linger late over wine, those who keep trying mixed wines. This phrase, linger late, in Hebrew, it's the word ahar, and it means to remain somewhere for a protracted period of time past the expected norm. And you know what I'm talking about, because I know you've been in a conversation before, and you get to that moment. It's like the moment where you know this is where we end the conversation, and the other person keeps talking. And you're aware that, that was the moment that this was supposed to be over. And you feel it. Even sometimes when you're in a setting like this and you're hearing a speaker, like there's a moment in your mind where it was like, okay, good. Okay, too much. And you know it intuitively. But I think what the scriptures are saying is, there are times when we linger in stuff longer than we ought to. Your workaholism, why are you spending that much time at work? It's not because you're trying to be productive. What are you trying to prove? What are you trying to numb out? I do some distance running, and I love to run long distances, and it takes up quite a bit of time, and I'll never forget, I was telling this friend about it, and he just said to me very matter-of-factly, anybody who runs that much is running from something. I think he's right. What this word is getting at is don't fill your life with stuff that distracts you and numbs you out from the important stuff that God has made you for. But then he goes on and says, don't get drunk with wine, which is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit. And I absolutely love this word. It's the Greek word plerao. Let me hear you say plerao. Here's where grammar just wins the day. Absolutely pays off. This word, plerao, it means to be filled, but it's an imperative. So it's a command. So Paul is saying, hey, you, do this. Be sure that you do this. But it's in the plural, so he's talking to everybody. Hey, all of you, be sure that you do this. But it's in the present continuous, meaning all of you, be sure that you do this on an ongoing basis. Be filled with the Spirit. But then there's this little twist. It's in the passive form, meaning you can't do this filling yourself. Do this all the time. all of you, continuously, but you can't do it. So what does that mean? It means in order to make room for the Spirit, we've got to empty out our own agendas. We've got to create space so that Spirit can come in and dwell and abide, and God can have his way in us. And my friends, if you are filling your life, if you are filling your belly, if you are filling your mind, lingering over stuff and numbing out to the things that God created you for, there will be no room for Spirit in your life. Let's not make the mistake of entertaining and amusing ourselves to death. Amen?